or
Right.
two nights before. And I had been there on that prior night as well. And so there was a lot of suspicion. People were on edge. And so I got constantly pulled out. And the term for it is security culture. An old school sort of anarchist sort of dropped that one on me, that security culture is big as part of protest movement. And with it comes us being, in my opinion, unfairly targeted, mislabeled, and
at times, they definitely, yeah.
And constantly having things shoved into our lens so that we can't do, because what we would like to do, which is be there as independent documenters and independent, non-ideological observers. But there's so few of us, and it almost fits outside of the context of what people believe is that you're either on one side or the other. So if you're going in as an independent who is not pushing an ideology, but is fairly talking to everybody, you're something of an anomaly, and they want to label you. They want to box you in.
And man, and I'll tell you what, to add to that, sorry to interrupt, but like, I'll tell you what's interesting too, is that you're either with us or against us is what follows up to that. Like, if you're not on our side as we deem it, and that's on both, and I hate saying sides, but that's from all different parties, all different groups of people, that are out there that we run into regularly in the protest world. And not even just protest, in the modern day world of news that's being made, as it's being made, there's different groups that are out there, and they spend a lot of time obsessing over us and what we believe and what we think, and they've short-sighted their viewpoint and looked right, past, or haven't even seen far enough that it's not at all what our personal opinions are. Because like with yourself and with myself and many other people that are out there doing independent journalism, it has nothing to do with our opinion at all, because that's not what we're out there to push at all. Which is why I carry a microphone everywhere I go. And it's because it's not about what I have to say. It's about what you have to say. It's not about what I think. It's what you think. And I'd rather hear your voice and elevate that, be it hard right, hard left, somewhere in the middle, or somewhere left out, and they don't even know. I think that's what we're trying to do, is help people become more educated as to what's happening without us being the ones doing the educating. And I think that's what's important to understand too, is that I don't think you and I think we talk about it. Like, I pray to God that there's smarter and much more informed people than me out there, because I'm not the guy. Like, I'm not going to teach anybody anything, but if anything, I could show them the people that are out there that might, but yeah, all too often they put a label on you. I get that all the time. Well, are you a patriot? Like, are you an Antifa streamer? Or, and it's kind of like these hushed tones. I'm like, no, I'm CJ. I'm just a humanitarian out here trying to figure it out, man. And people are like, well, that doesn't work for me, which feeds into my whole concept now, which is like, well, I mean, how about I'm a patriotic anti-fascist? How's that feel? People are like, wait a minute, those are big terms. You can't mishmash those ones. You're not allowed to do that. No, I absolutely can, because I'm allowed to do whatever I want.
Right. And it blows people's minds.
It really does, right? It
when
really
you
does.
take that independent stance.
Yeah.
And I was saying this right before you came on, that in some ways, in a lot of ways, because you've been doing a lot more than me as far as the live streaming is concerned, and I'll say that you have a skill of being able to get people to talk to you even in tense situations. There's a clip that was up, and I remember I just looked at it this morning, and I think you were in Washington DC, and you're on the leftist side. It looks like there's two different sides that are up against each other.
Yeah.
And a woman is questioning you and telling you that essentially you're not welcome.
Right.
And you say, well, no, that's not how it works. I'm here, I won't point the camera at you, but what do you have to say? Don't you want to say something about what your platform is and what you're here fighting for? And she kind of won't even talk to you. And
she just said, I don't talk to fascists. And I was like, well, I'm not a fascist. There you go. You're green light. Go ahead. Now you can talk.
Right.
Self-proclaimed, not fascist. There you go.
Yeah, but so much of this is not taking people at their word. It's that I'm going to, if you're not 100% with us in the sense that we can completely rely on you to give the message we want out there, but we're not going to trust you at all. But it's interesting. That was an interesting exchange, because you diffused it, and at the same time you got her to keep talking to you.
Right, and then one of her friends was there too. That was Another that was so yeah. So people have context on this one. That was during that first million mega march that they did.
November the 14th, I
Right,
think it was.
in DC. And people, it's funny, they assume like, oh, you went to a Trump rally. And I was like, I went to cover a Trump rally because these are big moments. Because I was also at that tribute to Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech in DC on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and I was there because it was an amazing event and it was an incredible piece of history being made. Hearing his granddaughter speak and just these powerful notions of people that are pushing towards change. But so we're in DC and I'm covering that event. And I ended up on the one side of the barricade that was probably, I'd give it 100 people in block, and some shields, and so maybe a little over 100. And on the other side, right in front of me, there was a line of police, that was wrapped around this little triangle kind of square in front of the courthouse. And then on the other side of the barricade that was right there was probably 10,000 people, like 10,000 hardcore, like Republicans that were there to like rep for Trump, a lot of American flags. And there was just that standoff line between the two people. And I was in that little area for a good hour probably. And it was having a tough time streaming because of the signals and all. But at one point I went to leave and they were like, no, you can't leave, man. You have to stay in here. We're not letting anybody out of the square area. So when I walked back to where I was standing,
they being the police or
the police, yeah, the police were, because there was, the whole, like the entirety of that downtown area, Freedom Square or whatever they call it, had marched up the hill, and it was like they had unintentionally, but it ended up working, like surrounded this group of like leftists, if you want to say. I don't even know the best way to describe it. Blocked individuals.
Black bloc. They identify on Twitter as leftists. So
okay,
so the folks who are of the revolutionary political left.
Okay,
that's another. Yeah, so
it's
tough. It's tough. Yeah. We don't even know what to say.
Especially with titles, right? Like I really am trying to be sensitive to pronouns. I'm trying to be more cautious, and I have been for the last year because it's a microprocessing thing for me. But for other people, for the person, it makes a big difference in how they're identified. Much like you and I don't want to mislabel anybody because
we don't want to be called. We don't want to be called something we're not.
Right, so, exactly. So yeah, that situation was really interesting, and the person that came up to me. As I came back in, I hadn't experienced this yet, but a couple umbrellas got in my face, and I was like, I pulled one down and looked at the guy, and I was like, really, man? Like, it's a little late in the game for this one. Like, and then he kind of even just got out of my way. He was like, you're right. I don't even, we're not going to stop you. You can walk any direction you want. And there's tens of thousands of people around me. So when I got up the line, that girl came up, or the person, and she was like, hey, only film your buddies. Don't film us. And I was like, well, who are my buddies? And she was like, the police. And I was like, I don't know any of them. I don't have any friends on this police force. Not that I wouldn't, but I don't have any friends here. Sorry. I'm just here filming like everyone else. And I was like, what makes my camera more dangerous to you than the 10,000 cameras that are pointing at you from across that 10-foot gap? Is it that you're afraid of who I am or who I represent? And I was like, I can tell you I don't represent anybody. That's when the microphone came in. She's like, well, just don't film us. And I was like, well, I'm not looking at you. I can't even see you behind me. But then I pulled my microphone out, which conveniently was right there. And I was like, well, then say something. I've got thousands of people right now that are watching live. Tens of thousands, probably 100,000 that'll see this video. Like, this is a beautiful chance for you to tell the world why you're here. Why do you feel so strongly about coming out and potentially putting yourself in danger? Like, if this crowd turned and went sideways, like, they would steamroll past those police and they can potentially cause a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, and we saw that later when there was fights between like Proud Boys and Antifa, and people were getting stabbed and beat up. And I was like, why are you so passionate about this? I want to know. Like, I really want to know. And it's sad that there's a kind of like a code of silence amongst those groups, right? Like they've kind of said, we don't talk to press, we don't talk to media, we don't really talk to anybody. And that honestly really breaks my heart because I've met some people in block leftists that have a really beautiful ideology. Like they really see it from a point of view that I was like, man, there's some common ground there in every grouping of life that I think we could all get down with. But it's tough because we can't get them to talk openly about it. And so it becomes a hush-hush situation, and people deal with things they don't understand the way that we always have, especially like in America, like we're kind of like, I don't get it. We'll cage it. We'll figure it out. Like, I don't understand. I don't know what that is coming at me. Let's shoot it. And we'll go ahead and diagnose it later, like, which is probably why we don't have aliens coming and visiting us, because we shoot him out of the sky. Bigfoot's elusive because they know we probably shoot him and then diagnose his body. No, but they almost. But
It's a strike first mentality. In other
Right,
words, that
right.
people are more, especially when they're on the streets, they're more concerned with these potential threats.
Right.
And there's a very interesting video that came out of the Pacific Northwest recently, where somebody had essentially been inside a debriefing after a march of a Seattle group in Black Bloc. And they had documented the debrief in which they're talking strategy about, hey, maybe we should have more people in plain clothes, because when we say out of the house into the streets and everybody's in Black Bloc, well, how, that doesn't appeal to,
Well,
Joe
they're talking
Normal, who's just
optics. Okay. Yeah.
right. So they're talking optics, but then the conversation goes to, and then one person says, well, I can't take my mask off because then I'd be a target. And then you sort of think, well, what's that? What's the reasoning behind, there is, in my opinion, this sort of, as I said, this strike first, that there are certain threats that are assumed. There are assumed threats, whether it's the white supremacist group behind every corner, whether it's the police, whether it's journalists, that everybody is out to, I mean, let's say there was a right-wing journalist. Well, the best way to change that right-wing journalist's coverage is not to jump him, which I saw in Hollywood. They jumped a guy who was they identified as right wing, not the night that you were there, but the 2 nights before, on the same night that the memorial was,
earlier in that night,
vandalized.
someone got
Someone
accosted as well.
Yeah,
And
I saw there were a couple of times. I was confronted several times myself in the Hollywood crowd, which is tough for me because this is my own backyard.
right, trust me, that I understand. Being in Seattle, it's such, like, we have such a radically unique protest community here. The block in Seattle, Portland, and it's changed. The culture has changed so much. I was watching videos from the early days down in Portland, and these same people that are probably now the hardcore, like let's get them type folks, were the ones that were like, and I'm not that, I'll pull up clips. I mean, I have a handful that I just pulled up not too long ago that were like, people are walking up like, hey, we came out here because we were watching your feed and we wanted to be a part of what we're watching. Not because I was saying, hey, rally your troops, get in block and get out here in these streets. It was because they saw what was happening through the lens of a camera that wasn't filtered for any one particular use, but they saw something that made them feel compelled to be a part of it. And these are medics. These are people that are just typical protest folk. I've been approached by people on the right as well. Like, I've been approached by like Proud Boys that were like, we saw the same video and we want to be a part of it. But they personalized it their own way. And what people are having a tough time with is like, I don't create those individuals. I don't make them who they are by showing people what's happening. I don't create somebody's desire to vote for Trump, raise an American flag in the back of their truck and drive up and down the street and do like car rallies. I don't create that person. I don't create the other side. I don't create someone who wants to block up and grab an Antifa flag and run that down the street. And that, I think, is the beauty of being able to make your own choices with what you see. And it's hard because the undoctored, unnarrated journalism, or this anthropological look at the world as it happens that we try to provide people, it's misunderstood, but it's vital. And I think that's what's important, is that it's a crucial part of what's happening right now, is to be able to look at it and not have somebody spoon feed you, and not even spoon feed, but jam it down your throat, like what's happening. Like, I can see it for myself. Don't insult my intelligence. Which is what this is all about, right? It's about an unfiltered view of the world as it's happening. So
I was just to take it back to the Hollywood night. I was just thinking, because I was watching your no. There's like no structure to this or anything. I'm just saying, like to connect with what you're just saying. You were in there in a way that was so comfortable, and I don't know if you said you had seen somebody be ejected at the same, or was that before you had arrived? That's what
I walked up for. Like, there's a bunch of police in the parking lot next to the memorial. And then like 8 more squad cars were pulling in, and I was like, oh, I wonder if they're getting ready to try to push everyone out of this memorial, which is, so everyone knows, it was kind of down in it was in Hollywood,
Sunset and Vine,
right in
front of the Chase Bank,
right. So it was in a very like central location. I mean, there's traffic everywhere. It wasn't like they were occupying a space that would be deemed private property or anything. It was public sidewalks type of thing, a public fountain. And then there was a guy there. Right when I went live, I had it muted, unfortunately, which sucks because the conversation that was happening between the gentleman that was who I actually met up with down there. I told him we were going to meet up with down there, and he's a filmmaker, a really well-known filmmaker, and they actually just won an award for We Can't Breathe, which is this beautiful short film that it's about 8-minute film out in Cleveland. They just made all these documentaries that are powerful, really amazing things. And so he was down there, and he's the one that confronted that guy and was like, listen, and he talked to him in a way that I was really impressed with. He was like, listen, man, you've agitated situations here. It's a memorial. Like, think about what you're doing. Like, you're acting out of pocket right now is what he was basically getting at. He was like, you're jamming your camera in people's faces that don't want it. Like, you're doing things kind of overtly that are making people very uncomfortable, and you're not reading the room. And he went into greater detail, but I was really kind of excited to hear that dialogue. And the guy in his film, there was like one or two other guys with him who were filming. They kind of were like, okay, we get it. And they stopped trying to push their way into that group. And I felt that vibe when I got there, when I was watching this happen. So I was like, all right, well, the thing about it's very cliquey. So like down in LA, they have their own block, and they know who's who and who's not. You can even tell people when you're in your black on black on black. Kind of like structurally who someone is and who they're with and how tall they are. You can pick people out of a crowd based off of, I would know people, that I'm familiar with. But when they see an unfamiliar face, immediately there's that apprehension. And I get a lot of it, because I was talking to people through Minneapolis that were dealing with terrible things that were targeted, that were like either protest leaders, even just speakers, people that would publicly speak about their views, and like their houses were getting broken into, they were getting super doxxed, and they were having like their animals were being hurt, like things that were just terrible things that were happening to these people that, and I was like, man, so that fear factor comes into play. And I understand that if you want to be out there advocating for something, block is maybe for a lot of people is the safest way to do it. They're in jeopardy of losing a job maybe, or something along those lines, but the fear of the reprisal shouldn't stop you from your desire to be able to be an advocate for what you believe. And I think that for a lot of the current issues that are taking place, be it labor rights or whatever it might be, or wrongful deaths at the hands of a police officer, a lot of the world wouldn't even know a lot of the things that are happening if it weren't for people getting out there and kind of raising some ruckus, And I don't mean that in the destruction and violence. I mean just being willing to go out there and be in the streets. And I met some people, a young man down in Sacramento who really opened my eyes and reminded me about the roots of what really compelled me. And he's an incredibly intelligent, he's 21-year-old young man, definitely a leftist, very well educated, and was incredibly open to talking about his beliefs, views, ideology, fundamentals, and things that he really kind of carried as his ethos. And it reminded me, like, yeah, that's a vital part of it all too. Some places are different though. Minneapolis is different. When I just got back from there, you don't see as much block, but there was still 1,000 people marching. You know what I mean? There definitely is that presence, but I think that as we move around the country, the geography definitely changes the way that people interact with their protest culture. Be the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and it's a whole bunch of different local scenes that each has their own history, has their own makeup of different cultural components. And what's interesting though is the security culture is pretty consistent. That has made its way, especially now having a year now to develop. The security culture is pretty intense, and it'll be interesting to see how things progress. Now, by the end of Minneapolis, something interesting I noticed is that a lot of people were in George Floyd Square, and you were able to stream in George Floyd Square. And that's not something that the weeks before was as easy to do. So again, everything is a matter of circumstance and of different, what's going on right now. I guess you could
absolutely.
But you were able to, in Minneapolis, when you were there the day that the show and verdict was announced?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just trying to pull this up because there is Andrew Mercado is Mercado Media. You know, he's based right there out of Minneapolis, and he's been out there from the beginning. And he and I have, you know, we have a history that goes back. You know, we've been we've tag team on things before, and we've kind of gone our own way and whatever. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, when I'm trying to find it right now, so don't think I'm not 100% here. But he put out a post recently. I was watching an IG live that he was doing. And if you guys didn't see this, I'd recommend it. And you can get over to Mercado Media and check it out. But one of the things he talked about was, and he put out a post, and you know what, here, you know, and I'm going to find it because it speaks directly to the security culture that we're talking about, and directly to the situations that are happening right now.
Was it in Minneapolis or?
Yeah, he's talking about George Floyd Square, and
Okay.
I was hoping to just read it directly. He basically, they went down there for there was Brianna, or B Money was one. She was a person. She was involved in the protest community. Was a big advocate for everything that was happening since the uprising in Minneapolis, and she passed away. And they were there paying their condolences and respect and doing a memorial. Well, apparently they were accosted by security, and were kind of chased out of the. I can't see it. I'm not seeing it now. But basically, what they said was they were chased out of the George Floyd Square, and security was at a point where they were like making threats and just becoming like just super, like they pushed people out that were day oneers, people that were like held that space as a sanctuary during the uprising, in the wake of all the riots that were taking place in Minneapolis. And even Andrew was saying how disgusted he was with the security. He was like, there's no way that that space will be held. If the city tries to come and take it back, people will not fight for that now. They're not going to, like, you know, the connection to that place is being corrupted by this weird security that's taking place. And
was this before then the Chauvin? This was before the verdict. Like,
just after, actually.
Oh, just after.
So yeah, he was talking about that. Like when I was out there in George Floyd Square, and the night of the verdict, and it was wide open, tons of people there. You know, we were it was music playing, and it was wide open because there was a lot of major press media there. There was, you know, just a lot of people that were there. You know, it was a big deal. It's international news. And what happened was, once the crowds left, like the security came back in, and they were like, all right, now we run this. And it stopped being a place, as Drew was saying, for like solidarity and for like comfort, you know, because that's kind of what it was, as he described it, a place where he would, when he got done doing a stream, he'd come back if he was out of town, and he'd go there, and it'd be kind of like his, you know, soil your roots and, you know, nurture your soul type thing, because it was a very inviting, very inclusive thing. And that's what I experienced in Minneapolis, was an incredibly inclusive group of people, and very open, very willing to speak, very willing to share their views. Even at Dante Wright's funeral, met some family, some friends, locals that were just incredibly engaging. Downtown, outside of the courthouse, in the wake of the Derek Chauvin verdict, just people were incredibly inclusive, you know. And I think that's what's changed in a lot of the communities. It's become very exclusive. Like, you're not a part of this, so you're not allowed to be in here. But you said something I think that's important, is if you've got somebody, they keep talking about providing a platform to the wrong people. And I think that we need to understand that it's all about education and understanding. And maybe you understand them enough to know that they're batshit crazy, you know, maybe like your view is not going to change on somebody, but not allowing them to speak or share their view is only going to keep you in an ignorant space. And that I don't think is acceptable, because you should fully understand what it is that if you hate something, like, I would hope that you fully understand it. And you're not just saying that because other people have said it, and what they say makes sense more so than your understanding of what it is that you're projecting this emotion towards. And so people are like, oh, you gave Proud Boys a platform. Like, I didn't provide them a platform. I went out there to better understand. I wanted to know what they were all about. Like, I keep hearing, I didn't know anything about them, because you can't really, you hear, like, you see like a Wikipedia description, but I was like, I'd rather hear it from the horse's mouth. You know, like, are you guys white supremacists? Yes or no? You know, I was asking very direct questions to not just guys in the group, but to like John Sullivan and to like Enrique Taro. Like, I was like, well, what's the deal? Like, you tell me. I want to hear it from you.
You mean James? Wait,
was it James
Sullivan?
James is the one that was at the Capitol. Yeah, his brother John Sullivan, I think, is the one.
No.
That I
John,
interviewed.
no, John.
I'm
was
getting
at the
backwards.
Capitol. Yeah,
John's
John
at
was
the
at the
Capitol.
Capitol. So
Yeah.
James Sullivan is the one who went to Portland. You're talking about Portland on September the 26th.
Yes.
The Proud Boys rally that was the
Yeah, and they had like the counter rally, and then they had the Proud Boy rally. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they had smoke going up on the stage, and like
It was a whole production. Yeah,
they had a whole thing.
It was a whole thing. Yeah,
it was a thing. Yeah,
was
I was there. I was there that day too. And
Okay.
for those who don't know, there were 2 rallies that were held. You know, if you were live streaming there at, I think it was called Delta Park. There was there was another rally that was a couple miles away, and this was done sort of intentionally. Somehow they figured out to have different rallies in different spaces of the city so that it wouldn't devolve into all-out brawls. So
it's kind of like what happened in Huntington when we were down there. You know, they had that White Lives Matter rally that was planned, and then they were like, well, fine, we'll do an equality rally, like a BLM rally, like 2 hours before in the same space, and just hold the space. And so it kind of diffused what could have been a very, from what we saw in the tricklings, it could have been a very racially fueled exchange between 2 groups that are going to be very strong, have strong feelings about things. So
it could have, but the question for Huntington Beach, when I look back at that, was how much of that, there wasn't much of a right-wing presence. I mean, there was only a couple of scattered. At first I said there was one guy with a swastika tattoo, and after I researched all these other feeds, I realized there were like 4 people, like 4 different incidents.
Did you see the Grand Wizard apparently that was there?
Right. That's
they were like, hey, that's the Grand Wizard. I think we were talking out in the street. Maybe I think in passing that someone's like, hey, I think that's the Grand Wizard. Some dude in a baseball cap, and I was like,
he had a cane. His name is something Hagen, and
I think
he had a cane, and he was in a nondescript sort of black t-shirt and shorts, and he was just kind of on his own. And that's one of the people that I was counting: the swastika guy, the Grand Wizard guy. Right. There was another guy who was a skinhead who had some kind of rune tattoos on the back of his neck. And then
there was a guy that was all like wrapped up too, that got chased into the police station.
That's the guy, the 4th guy I was going to say, the guy who had the kind of mummy wrap.
And he was just out spitting a bunch of racial
he was like, at one point he was like, hail Jesus and hail something else. And and it wasn't clear if he had a crew. Now the swastika guy had 3 people that were with him that the crowd kind of didn't even really notice.
Did you notice how those guys just disappeared? Like once he got confronted, they were like,
we're at they
we're gonna go to Orange Julius and get some smoothies, you know. Like they just disappeared.
They did. Yeah, he had 3 guys with him as that clip.
Did you notice that the thing about that that's interesting too is those guys that were with him all had long sleeve shirts on. They were all like full long sleeve button up shirts. He was the one guy with the short sleeve, and you know, he was proudly repping that swastika. Now I gotta talk on this for just a second if I can. The issue that I have is I posted a clip of that video. Just like a 20-second clip. You're in there actually. You're down in front of me. Like when I'm filming that, I climbed up on top of something. I was looking down, but you were like right in front of me. And when the Asian man he kept getting in front of him and saying, "Why do you hate me? Why do you hate me?" And the guy was walking, and the whole crowd kept picking up on it, and it just snowballed. It turned into this big crowd. You saw it. Like everyone started following this one guy. And he finally like grabbed the guy right in front of that. He threw him in the side of a police car. He was like, "Man, I'm trying to walk the pier. Get out of my face." And then he kind of like the other gentleman kind of got a little close. I think he kind of maybe bumped him or maybe hit him with the brim of his hat. It was kind of a little bit of a chaotic moment. And that's when he popped him, hit him one. And what was interesting about it though was that people were really like, they were going into the details as to what was going on, why it was a big deal. Like, well, the one guy was blocking his path, was antagonizing him. And they're like, well, this guy is there because he's a white supremacist, and like, but you don't know that it could have been this tattoo. And I was like, let's just get down to the brass tacks. All right. It was advertised as a White Lives Matter rally, and they had the Klan out handing out propaganda in that neighborhood on Easter morning in Huntington Beach.
I think it was in Newport.
Was it Newport?
The flyers, there were some flyers that went out.
Well, someone had one in Huntington Beach that they showed me, and I assumed that they had got it locally. Okay. But Newport, it even had a hotline number that I called that went to South Carolina. Right. 24-hour hotline for the Klan, the New White Knights. whatever it is.
I think that was a Newport Beach story, but Newport's right by Huntington. I mean,
Okay.
it's really close.
Okay.
It's really close.
The guy that he showed me the deal, and I was like, all right, cool. I took a picture of the one he had, and I called off that card. But so when you came out, you don't come out with flags and whatnot because they just happen to be in your pocket, right? You come out there because you want to make a statement. And so you have a group that's already there. They're holding space. They're making their statement, right? And then you have this guy that comes out, and a lot of people were just, what's that?
It should be noted, though, that the group that was holding space, the Huntington Beach Black Lives Matter, I interviewed Troy, who's the organizer. They were on the other side of the street. So there's one detail that is important, which is that the counter protest of Black Lives Matter is happening on the pier side. Now that group gets restless, and they come over to the store. Let's call it the stores,
shopping area,
the shopping side. And at that shopping side, there were only two guys with long flagpoles that were, one of them was having he was a former Marine. He was having a discussion with students, which was actually, I think you captured part of it in your stream. It was kind of active and interesting. The other guy was a really far gone QAnon. This is the guy that was saying that the Democrats assassinated Kobe Bryant, right? This guy was,
that was funny. That guy, also, the Clintons killed Kobe Bryant. And I was like,
right.
What? He was like, well, I just heard that one this morning. And I was like, you can't just be spitting that stuff. I just heard it this morning. I was like, wow, okay.
That guy was just stream of consciousness, like random QAnon stuff. And then you had those two sort of, flag wavers, which isn't a huge presence. You had one guy who had this bushy beard and a beanie that said "Make America Great Again," and he was just kind of walking around. He wasn't messing with anybody, but he was just. Then you had bikers that were just like regular ass white biker dudes who were being accosted and mistargeted as they thought 3%ers if they had something that said 1% on their thing, which is a motorcycle club. It's a motorcycle like the Hells Angels, or it's sort of the 1%ers or the sort of outlaw
lifestyle riders, that are that's their life. Yeah.
Exactly. So but the crowd doesn't know all this. They just want some targets. They're trying to, the mob is exerting themselves. So the issue that you have is that the activists come across the street to engage with those who they consider to be fascists. Now, of those, the four that I mentioned were definitely white supremacist types. The guy with a rap, the Grand Wizard guy who didn't even nobody even noticed him.
Right. Yeah.
Confronted him.
I wasn't going to buy into it. Someone said that, and I'm like, oh, you want me to go over and be like, excuse me, sir, are you the Grand Wizard? And then have the whole world turn on this guy. And I was like, uncorroborated facts, man. I'm not going to say anything. He better be wearing a sheet out in this crowd with a pointy head for me to say, hey, you're in the Klan. Because the second you say that, even if you're joking, like that crowd is
a whole bunch of people hear it and they're just,
what Klan member? Get him. And I'm like, dude, I'm not going to be the guy to put that shade on someone. Like, I'm not doing that.
Now, I did do that with a guy with a swastika, but that's because there was a swastika.
Well, be clear, like I was saying, he came out to make a statement. Like, and this is what people are looking right past. And this happened in DC with the standoff with the Bloc, Antifa, and Proud Boys. Like, everybody out there, not everybody, but in these situations, people try to generalize, but we need to be specific about what's happening. That guy, he was standing where he was standing, and you could, if you've ever been in a crowd, which you've been in many, we both have, it's not hard to understand, body language. The guy was there with his little group, and they were kind of holding their space. And it was not a coincidence that he happened to have a swastika tattoo that was, the one bare forearm in the crowd, right? Would make you assume that his group, there's probably more hidden underneath those shirts. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that's their business. But they were there to make a statement. The gentleman who got in his face, the Asian gentleman, he was making a statement as well. And maybe not by looking for an answer to that question, but by posing that question to him, why do you hate me? Why do you hate me? And his statement was being made too. So they both were out there making their statements. And then when things went sideways was when the one guy kept getting in his way and kind of maybe got a little too close, whatever, but then he hit him, then there was a physical confrontation. And that's when things went south, right? But up to that point, it's understood that everyone was out there to be there for a purpose. It wasn't just a coincidence that like some guy with a swastika tattoo was walking down the street, as he said, with three of his buddies, like in uniform, basically, like just happened to be walking by a BLM, rally, like, oh,
Right.
you know,
No,
what are you guys doing here? You know, like, oh,
it's
you know what's going
it's
on.
yeah, it's fair to say that they came with a purpose, that they came
Right.
with an intent. You know, it's interesting that both guys ended up getting arrested. The Asian
Right.
guy got charged as well as the guy with the swastika. Now I in another live cast closer to that date, I had sort of questioned my own. You described, you know, what it is if you had walked up to Grand Wizard guy and said, "Hey," you know, started posing questions, that would have brought like all these people, right? It was a similar situation. So the Asian guy actually came up to me. He saw I was streaming, but he was talking to a friend of his right next to me, within an earshot, and he said, "There's a Nazi guy over there." And I actually turned to him and I said, "Where?" And he directed me over them. Me and this other streamer, who I guess his name is Andrew, we both are filming him first, and the Andrew guy asks, "Can I ask you a question?" And the guy with the swastika tattoo basically just tells him to fuck off.
Yeah.
Then the other guy shows up, the Asian guy, and says, "Why do you hate me?" Then the guy walks away and he pursues him. He says, "No, if you're strong enough to, you know, stand up for your beliefs, tell me, why do you hate me?"
That's right. When I keyed in, actually, when I was really started following that group.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he gets in front of him, and he does stop a little to initiate contact. You know, in
Mhm.
other words, he stops a little and then he pushes him out of the way, you know, so forth. And then the guy who hits him with a swastika turns back and hits him, which is significant because he could have just kept walking if he wanted
Right.
to. But
Yeah.
instead he turns back and then hits him,
Yeah.
gives him a left, actually. So
Yeah.
anyways, that's like an anatomy of one of these confrontations. And what I think the observation that you're making, which I would sort of agree with somewhat, is that this all sort of happens because people are wanting to challenge each other to some extent. And
Right.
I am participating in probably the most muted way, in the sense that, and if you listen to your live stream, you hear me several times say, "What's the story behind the Nazi tattoo? What's the
Yeah.
story behind the Nazi tattoo?"
Right.
But as I'm asking this, I'm sort of asking myself, okay, am I agitating the situation or am I just trying to get the information? You know, and
Right.
I hope that I was able to maintain the line. But
Yeah.
obviously, each time I'm saying it, I can feel the crowd, other people hear it and kind of move in.
Because
And
it stopped
so,
being a question at one point. It was a question for you. It was a statement for other people. Much
right,
like when the gentleman was like, "Why do you hate me?" For him, it may have been a question, but for other people, they don't hear the why. They just hear, "You hate me. You hate me." You know, and that's like the human ear and our subconscious are trained to like pick up on things like that. You know, we don't. The entirety of things kind of moves past our processing points. Like it's marketing, you know, it's like a billboard situation. You know, you have like 2 seconds for the human eye to capture what's ever on a billboard. So it has to like be loud, brash, and like catchy. So you're like, oh, that's where they're selling fireworks. I see that because I'm driving by at 80 miles per hour and something about it said fireworks here with an arrow. There might have been a million other words on that billboard, but what you saw is what stuck out to you. So that's how we process with people. And in these situations, that's what it comes down to. You're asking a question, but that crowd quickly kind of goes a different direction.
well,
You know,
because
they're like,
you take the information, which is, oh my gosh, this guy has a Nazi tattoo. He has a
right,
Nazi tattoo.
sure,
Nazi. And what's sort of tough to kind of, as someone who's you know, chronicling this, and without taking any, again, not about sides or this or that. I mean, obviously morally, I want to stand up in my work to and say no to Nazis, that this is,
yeah.
we don't want, as much as I'm an advocate for free speech, I'm not I'm also an advocate for saying that society should say no to Nazis. I
Yeah,
mean,
no to
that's
hate. I mean, we should
no to
definitely, yeah,
hate.
let's
Yeah.
agree on that one on a
Yeah, I
human level.
think,
We should all agree. Yeah, we should say no to hate. Let's say
right.
no to hate, everybody. We do that? All right.
Exactly. And specifically in this case, that is a hate symbol. Now, you also have to understand, I've been running around since last May and June, and I'm curious how, if your experience being from the Pacific Northwest was much different than mine. This was the first time that I found a legit. There was one other tattoo, and it looked like the guy might have had like a prison, an 88
Right.
prison tattoo. This was in Tulsa. I found one guy out of the thousands of people that were there to see Trump in Tulsa back at the end of June.
Right.
And so this was the first kind of bona fide statement white supremacist type that I'd seen. So I
Yeah.
would not be I would be dishonest if I didn't admit that it was somewhat exciting in the sense that
Sure.
I'd been pursuing this kind of, I'd been
Right.
hearing white supremacists, white supremacists, white supremacists. So when I finally found one, it was like I was asking the question. But I'm
Right.
curious. I'm curious.
It's a fabled unicorn almost. Like, all right, everyone gets tagged with it, but you're like, what is anyone really? Like, where are
Yeah,
they? Because they do exist. They definitely do exist. Let's
but
not shadow that out.
that's the other thing, though, is that the crowd called 9 other people Nazi that weren't Nazi before they found the one Nazi.
There was a guy in a Levi Strauss shirt. He had a Levi
Right.
T-shirt. Remember that guy?
Flip
They were like, "Well, you're a fascist." Yeah, and he was like, "My wife bought me this shirt. Like, it's a Levi shirt. It has an American eagle on it, but or a bald eagle, whatever." But he's like, "Well, how am I a fascist? You know what? What are you talking?" And you could tell that guy was there because he said he was curious. And you talked to him, right? He was like, "Yeah, I'm just curious and wanted to see what was going on, asking some questions."
And he was filming on their side of the
over
pier,
on the pier side, yeah.
on the pier side. And so then the confrontation became, well, why aren't you wearing a mask? He wasn't wearing a mask, right? Outdoors.
Which immediately is symbolic of being a right-wing, like patriot, like, I mean, you fill in the blank, anything that's not,
Well, that's somebody came up to in Hollywood. That's what the guy said. You don't belong here to me. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And we started having a conversation. He said, I saw you talking into your live stream without a mask on. That's a red flag. And I was like,
you're like, was I socially distanced? Was I, was I under 4 feet? Because apparently all you have to do is duck and COVID can't get you, because you can walk into a restaurant wearing a mask, but once you sit down, COVID free, right? I'm like, all right, so and I don't wear a mask a lot of times because I can't breathe, man. My nose has been broken so many times that and I've got diminished lung capacity from having H1N1 back about 9 years ago. So it's kind of like, I feel like I'm getting waterboarded. So I have to be really cautious about what I use for a mask. Otherwise, I start hyperventilating, and it's not good. Not that I use that. I just don't wear a mask at great things unless I need to, And if I'm in a crowd, like I was wearing one in that crowd, because you're in a crowd of people, and those are red flags for a lot of people, the whole mask thing. But you're out in Minneapolis and like on a march of 1,000 people, you know what I mean? And you're not seeing a ton of masks in that crowd either. You know what I mean? It's a blend, but I mean, a mask, that's a whole nother segment.
Yeah, it's a whole other that's a whole other can of worms. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
But I've seen people in Washington, DC, especially. There was one incident and I think it was before the December the 12th. So it must have been the night of December the 11th in Washington, DC. I saw them just go after anybody who didn't have a mask. Yeah. And it was selective outrage, because I saw them one after another go after white people with with no mask. And then a group of like 4 or 5 black people came through, Black Lives Matter, and they were just like, okay. Like they didn't mob them. So it was selective. It was selective outrage as interpreting the indicator of, this is a white person without a mask, so we're going to mob them. So look, I'm just being honest about
I get it, man. Seen. I've experienced it. Trust me. Like from the very beginning. I mean, from my very first time going live up in Seattle, like I had multiple people be like, "Hey, are you a cop? Are you a cop? Are you a cop?" And I was like, "Why? You look like a cop." And I was like, "What do you mean I look like a cop? I'm a bulky white guy with this face, cop face apparently." And
resting cop face.
Resting cop face, yeah, exactly. But I had like my cousin with me who was running camera, and so I had a microphone. I'd walk around. That's always when I think you do interviews. Like, I want to talk to people, and they're like, "Oh, he's undercover," and I just laugh. I'm like, "How undercover do I look? Like, I'm a 250-pound dude with a microphone and a cameraman. Like, how covert is that? It's like so overt that it's covert." I'm like, no, that's not how it rides. But people have, and then it escalated. It was like, oh, maybe he's a Fed, and it was like, no, he's CIA and NSA, and I was just like, you guys, I'm using an iPhone. Like, they would give me better equipment, I'm sure, if I was of any importance. But there was always that stigma that went around. And then it's funny, I was down at that Proud Boy rally that was down there in the when they had the Proud Boy rally and the BLM rally that were happening,
September 26th. Yeah.
No, in Delta Park. Yeah, in Delta Park. Right. And I had a guy that was with me that came to hold camera, and I had security with me at that point because I thought there was going to be a huge clash between those groups. And so, I had like my guy from Straight Up LLC, who runs a security company out in Seattle. big Polynesian cat, and this guy Dawson was with me. And Dawson, we're in the hotel getting ready to go out that morning, and I'm giving him like the gear that he needs. And we did like a trauma kit coverage because I carry trauma kits everywhere I go now ever since Kenosha. So we were kind of doing things. And so he had his little trauma kit bag with him. And I looked at him, and he's, like 6'1", 6'2", probably 260. And I was like, wow, you look just like a cop. And I was like, I get it now. I totally get it. Yeah, there's no way you don't look like a cop. I was like, take your hat off. Nope, you still look like a cop. Put your hat back on. Now pull up your mask. Still look like a cop. Pull your mask down. Hat backwards. I was like, nothing about you doesn't look just like a cop. And I was like, all right, everybody, I get it now. So it was one of those moments where I was like, yeah, you have a cop look.
I've gotten it too, though.
Yeah,
which,
you do look like a cop. Are you a cop?
Are
you a cop?
Like a TV cop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I play one. I may not be one in real life, but I play one.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so does Ice-T. So let's get past that. All right? Is he a real cop?
Exactly. I want to be the the commissioner, the guy who's like, look, you're off the force.
It's funny because I look like the commish. You know what I mean? I look like the commish. That's my jam. You know what I mean? The original commish. Whatever. No, but you know what's funny though? I'll say this. One of the things to talk about the aesthetics of individuals, right? Like the optics, if you will. I had a conversation. It was really powerful conversation with a young lady in the CHOP way back in the beginning. And I just wrapped my feet, and she came up to talk to me because she was like, she said some pretty derogatory things to me out of this crowd. And I think she watched the rest of the interviews that I did and took it in, soaked it in, and realized that I wasn't what she was assuming I was. And I didn't get a lot of, that didn't happen. That was very rare in the beginning days. In the CHOP Chaz, even down in Portland, you didn't have people that were like accosting you and being like, you're not allowed to be here, get out, Like they were just, it was more inclusive, much like what, a lot of things were until security channel, like the structure started changing and whatnot. But and the groups that were more in control started becoming more in control and getting a little bit drunk with power about what they could do and who they could control. And the Northwest got really bad with that. But she came up to me and she was like, hey, are you live? And I was like, no. She was like, I want to apologize for what I said to you earlier. It was just a knee-jerk reaction. And she got really emotional, and she opened up to me and she was like, I was raped by a man a white man that, and I can't, you don't look like him, but there's just a representation that I see when I see older, like she said older, which I was like, come on, call me old. But for her, basically what she said is that the personification that I gave to her was a trigger. And so that's how she responded. And she did something that I thought was beautiful. She took a moment to get to know me as a person a little bit better. And we had an incredible conversation and in a very embraceful interaction where she was able to kind of, and I'm not going to grandiose it, but I don't think she like solved all of the issues that come along with that horrific experience. But she was able to process at least that experience with me and get through the moment of seeing something that to her triggered, because for her, that was something in her life that was a very traumatic experience. And that carried with me throughout a lot of my time that I spent in these different protests and throughout the country. Is I realized that we don't know what someone's life experience is. We don't know what they've gone through. I don't know what you've gone through entirely. I don't know what a lot of 99.9% of the people that I've talked to have gone through. And so when we see these people, and I met people and I'm saying when the day Jacob Blake was shot, I was in Chicago. I made it to Kenosha that evening. I was there. What you saw in front of the police station wasn't a group of block that was out there, F the police. It was family members and friends, people from the community, people who knew Jacob that were part of his community, that were like heartbroken. They were in tears, or there was crying. There was yelling that was coming from like a place of deep hurt in their soul, and it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't anything other than when these people were looking at these police, they saw the person that shot Jacob Blake for them, and using that, and granted, I'm sure people have things to say about that, but if you look at that on a bigger scale, when you see something that to you triggers an experience in your life that was, traumatic, you're going to respond in kind. There's going to be things in you, microprocessing things, microaggressions that are going to come out. And I think that we need to move, as we're doing it, we're moving forward as a nation, and the younger generations are slowly they're educating past and out of these microaggressions, where we see, like, my parents' generation were around during segregation. That was a part of their life. And so the things that are in them, some of the triggers that they have, some of the little knee jerks that they would have had growing up, was just kind of part of, like, society at the time. And we're moving, I hope, and I ask that question a lot, I hope we're moving away from those things, so that when we see somebody, and this is specifically based off color, based off religion, based off these major indicators, that we don't immediately assume them to be a part of the negativity of the history that we've been taught. We can appreciate that there's an individual there that has their own belief structure in their own life, and, so what I'm getting at is, like we talked about earlier, is these labels that come up all too often. We need to remember that people are human, and that's what we need to look at them as first. Now, they're going to represent, if they want to go out there with a swastika tattoo and represent that, I mean, you kind of taken that opportunity off the table. You no longer get to be like, oh, this is just another guy on the boardwalk. Like, now you're out here and that's what you're representing, And it's tough because the police do the same thing. When they put on a uniform, they represent the police force. And for people that have dealt with police brutality and situations like that, all police represent the optics in their subconscious processing, that police are the uniform. It's the badge, it's the nightstick, it's the gun, it's the radio, it's the presence, the red and blue lights, whatever it is. Like, for them, if they've dealt with a traumatic experience with the police, all police represent that trauma. And so when we're looking at it from a racial standpoint, people that have been dealing with that, since the conception of our country, since we've been around, since the foundations of some of the things that we've had to move away from, with slavery and some of the terrible things that were part of, some of the building blocks of the nation, that we can appreciate that we're a young country, but we've made great strides in moving away from, the atrocities of some of the things of our past, right? So anyway, I just realized that as I was moving forward, that I don't really give people too much grief if their knee-jerk reaction is to look at me a certain way and treat me a certain way. I just have to react through kindness and understanding, and give them an opportunity to look at me differently. And hopefully I can represent a group of people that look like me, or, carry themselves the same way, whatever, or maybe it's independent journalists, whatever it is whatever group I might be able to represent, and they might be able to see them differently through the course of understanding and conversation. And I think that's what, scary to think that a lot of people are talking less and judging more in a world where people are thinking so much differently than each other, and we should celebrate that, difference. So. Well, sorry about the rant there, but
no, it's not a rant when it's when you're making actual sort of connections and understanding, promoting that kind of understanding between people, and that's what I like about your work, is you do this much better than I do, which is you engage with people and you diffuse situations. I try not to get defensive when people call me the wrong thing. As we've talked about, that happens to you too. But that you're willing to sort of stick it out, I think this is what we're going to be all tested on in some way. Because the one sort of consistent roadblock, that if you're any independent that's out there covering these kinds of actions, is security culture, and that exists on the right as well as the left. And I've seen that. When I met you, they were
in DC.
Yeah,
remember that? Yeah,
they were playing a little joke where they, just a bunch of the Proud Boys just move on the lone independent.
It didn't feel like a joke at the time, I'll tell you right now. And real fast, I'll tell you guys what he's talking about. When I was in DC, you got the dates. You're great with that, man. You got the dates.
Yeah. This would have been December the 12th.
December the 12th. And so that was right before, actually, there was just a situation where that was right after stabbing, right? Like, where the guy kind of came into the crowd, he got accosted, someone pulled his mask off, and then it turned into a big brawl, beating. They were beating up on this guy. It ended up being a black man. And one of the guys, one of the Proud Boys, got stabbed a couple times in the stomach. Again, play that scenario out however you want. If you saw the video, watch it from a couple different angles, play that out. The dude was getting stomped on by a lot of people, so, you had a knife, whatever happened. Luckily no one died or was critically injured in that scenario. But right after that is, I think, when Enrique Taro and his kind of henchmen, you know, his right hand men, they came up and circled me, you know, and I'm holding my stream, you know, and I'm doing my thing, and he's like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "CJ." "What do you want?" And like one of those guys grabbed my phone, was looking at it and looking at my my watermark and whatnot. "But who the fuck are you?" And I was like, "CJ TV, man. Like, I've interviewed you before." But, and I'll tell you right now, what happens a lot of times, like what happened in Huntington, when people are like, they're stirred up and they're looking for an outlet. This is late in the day, and these guys were, I mean, it smelled like 151. Like, they were breathing fire. And I was like, man, I'm getting drunk just inhaling y'all's breath right now. Like, everyone had been drinking. And that's kind of what the Proud Boys are self-revered as, like a drinking club. You know what I mean? Like, Enrique said it in Portland. He said, well, we're just a group of drinking buddies with a patriot problem. And I was like, okay, well, you know, there you go. They were definitely on the drink that night. And they found somebody that they could target their attention. And they were like, they thought that I was an Antifa spy, right? And they were like, you know, ready to, you know, elicit some street justice as they saw it, you know what I mean? Had I been an Antifa spy. But what got me is I was like, well, what right do you have to accost me right now, regardless of who you think I am? Like, if you're out here fighting for the freedom of the streets right here against, you know, against Antifa, you know, but then you act in the exact same way. I was like, what right do you have? I was like, get the fuck off me, man. Get away from me. And I was like, why are you touching my camera? And one came up later in the night as I dropped after the stab. Actually, it was before the stabbing. After the stabbing and all that big fight and everything, I took my sister was with me. I took her and dropped her off in the van. I was like, I really don't want you out here. My brother-in-law will kill me if anything happens to you. You know, I was like, your husband's gonna, you know, it'll be the end of me. And I grabbed my vest, my stab vest. And as I came back, one of the Proud Boys like rolled up on me, and he was like, grabbed my phone and threw it, you know, and he was like, "Fuck you, CJ, I saw you earlier," is all he said, and took off on a razor scooter. And I was like, you look like a punk right now, man. Like, can't haul up and like talk some shit to somebody and take off on a razor scooter. That's against the rules of the streets. You stay and fight it out, bro. You do not get to accost me on a razor scooter. That is against the law of the streets. And he took off, and I was like, the fuck is that supposed to mean, man? You know, but and then people are like, oh, you're a Proud Boy. I'm like, no. Like, look at what happens out there in the streets with those same people. They're like, no, you're not one of us. And then I was talking to people like, no, we don't talk to press. We don't talk to press. And they had one of the guys that came up, and he was like, man, I've been following you from the beginning. I really appreciate your work. And they grabbed him, and they rode him to the side of the street, and they were scolding him. They're like, dude, you do not talk to press if you're out here representing us. And I could hear them giving him the business. And I was like, holy shit, dude. Like, why are you guys all so worried about it? Like, what? You know,
it's the same security culture from the left that was being practiced on the right. You know, they had all their earpieces and
yeah, and they were singling people out. There was like who was out there? Like I mean, there was tons of people out. You were out there. I was out there. There was BCP was out there. You had I mean, everybody was out there. I just
talked to BG on the scene. I talked to a lot of people who've been out there. That were out there that night, because that night was so chaotic and it was so all over the place.
But you know what happened that night, real fast, and then I want you to go on. Was what I was talking about, how everyone's there to make a statement, right? Like, people are out there to make a statement. The Proud Boys were out there, and they were like marching around. They were like, F Antifa, F Antifa, F Antifa. Antifa was out there with their flags, F the Proud Boys, F the Proud Boys. And everyone was battle geared up, ready to brawl. And so I got grief. It's not about me, but when the police were kind of like kettling people around, you know, they were trying to channel the flow of traffic to keep these groups away from each other. Well, finally, like, you know, there was a break in the lines. Proud Boys came around the corner one way. Antifa was there. There was no one between them, but air and opportunity, as they say in the streets. And they rushed each other, and it was a fight. They were fighting with each other. Exactly what they were both looking for. You know,
was this over by Black Lives Matter Plaza or by the hotels?
No, it was kind of closer to, like, in between the hotels and the plaza. It was in the streets out in the middle. This is when the one girl on the scooter, there was two black girls on the scooter. Like, she got knocked out really bad, and but she had a knife at one point. They were like, oh, she was stabbing people, or, you know, it was just the melee when people are getting stomped on. You know, and at that point, like, one guy was on the ground getting kicked and beat on pretty good, and I pulled a bunch of people off him, and I was like, man, get up, and I kind of shoved him back towards the shield wall they had, the Antifa wall over there. And he went down again, and my sister, much against my what I was telling her, I was like, just stay out of this. You need to stay away from this group. I don't want to get hurt. She even went out and picked the guy up again and was like, hey, buddy, you need to get out of here. Like, get out of here. And I saw people that were, it happened again. Like someone was getting stomped on. I was kind of, hey man, back off. Like they're already down. You don't need to stomp on this person. Like you fought. Like be a man. I don't want to say be a man about it, but be a man about it, man. Like I've never been okay with seeing people get done on the deck. Like stomped out. Like if you fight, knock someone down. Like if they're ready to call it quits, you help them up, shake hands, you go away. You got it out of your system, right? But if you're looking to just thoroughly beat somebody, like you could potentially murder someone through the wrong punch or kick. Now everybody's implicit, everyone's going out for murder, and like you don't need that. Like if you want to get out your aggression, man up about it, make it a fight, deal with it, and then call it good. They have a mutual combat law in Seattle or in Washington.
Oh, really?
Like if we were in the street and we were like, hey, you want to fight? And I was like, yeah, I want to fight. The police would just step back and like, hey, they agreed, they want to fight. We could scrap it out right there and then be like, all right, cool, got it out of my system.
Well, that's what's so interesting. And I've reviewed, I had one guest who was there for, the cider riot. The cider riot was in Portland in 2019. And what's interesting is the police were supposedly close by. They let the thing play out. And at different melees, people are actually like shaking hands and then like going into fisticuffs and then shaking hands at the end. And then it gets bad because a woman gets knocked out,
right?
And then it just all descends into all
chaos. Yeah,
all chaos. So this thing that was happening on December the 12th in Washington D.C. kind of people who made the trip were there for some kind of action, physical action. At one point, a big MAGA group marched on Black Lives Matter Plaza. They came out of like an alley that was to the west of it, I believe, and they just sort of made a surprise march. And then they marched, and it was just mayhem.
Yeah.
And
well, I got caught in that too at one point when I first got there. That day, earlier in the day, during the daylight hours, we walked up to like one corner of BLM Plaza, like one of the side roads, one of the roads that came out. You got it lined up, man. I'm impressed. Your geographical acuteness here is impressive, and your dates. But the police had a big line there. There's a handful of other block members and Antifa, whatever. They were trying to get into the BLM Plaza, and the police weren't letting them in. They're like, "No, we're not letting you in. Like, it's not happening." And they were holding that space. Now, to be clear, before I even went out there, I made it clear. I was like, listen, if there's going to be an issue, like, I'm not going to fight it. They advertised for this space. Like, they put out flyers and online flyers and whatnot. Like, and they're like, hey, come to BLM Plaza. Like, we're doing a protest. We're doing a rally, whatever you want to call it. And I was like, that's their rally. Like, I'm not going to be with someone that's like, no, I have the right to be here too. I'm going to put a camera in your face because that's just not what I do. And so we got to the police line and I guess they got on the radio. They heard that the Proud Boys were coming up the street. So they opened up the police line. They're like, get in there. You need to go ahead and go in. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a brawl out here on the street. So they let them through. And when the police line opened up, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go in here. I'm not going to go all the way down the street, the one block down to the plaza and end up having to be an issue. But I went in and I started interviewing some people. And then we got immediately we got accosted by a group of like 4 or 5 people that came up. And it was interesting because they were like, we're not even trying to talk to you, bro. You just need to get the fuck out of here. Like, you need to leave now. You're not welcome here. And immediately I was like, no problem. I'm out. I'll leave. No worries. I got it. And the guy that was telling me kind of stepped back. It was this younger black gentleman. And he was like, you not a problem with this? Or however you word it. I was like, no, man, this is your event. I'm not trying to be antagonistic, man. You guys don't want me to be in here. It's totally cool. I get it. I'll kick rocks. And it was crazy because he shook my hand. It was like, I really appreciate you doing that. I'll let them know how respectful you were. Like, I really appreciate you being cool with this. Meanwhile, my sister, who didn't get it, she's like, well, you can't make us leave. And I was like, please just be quiet. Just walk away. Just walk away. And she was really like arguing with somebody over here on the side. But the one gentleman that came up to me was like, oh, man, all right, cool. I appreciate you being compliant or whatever, however he worded it. And I think that moment for me was a big deal for them too. Because I was like, listen, man, like, we all are allowed to be out here, but like, we don't need to fight while we're out here. Like, I'm here to get understanding, not to be an agitator I don't want to be the news. I want to cover it. I want to be able to ask questions and hear what you have to say. But you and me sitting here having a fight is going to be a highlight reel. Sure. I'm sure like you'd get viewers out of it. It's like, oh, it's going down, but I don't care about it. That's not my focus. Right. And I think it's yours either. It's just kind of like, which is why we try to like kind of blend into the background as best we can. Like why are you always wearing black? I'm like, because it's the least bright color you could wear. blend in.
You do blend in, and that's part of it.
Thank
That
you.
is part of it. Yeah. No. So one question that somebody had earlier, when
Mhm.
you were talking about a story of somebody who was getting kicked out. Was that did you say it was at the time we were talking about Hollywood, and
Mhm.
you had said that some people were sticking their cameras in people's faces or something. But
Mhm.
were you talking about a different city? Do you remember that?
No, no, that
That,
was
that,
that
that
was
was
Hollywood.
Hollywood.
Yeah, that was Hollywood.
Because somebody asked here, what are specific differences between your actions while streaming and the guy you were just referring to who was asked to leave? In other words, was there something that person was doing that you weren't?
Yeah, I think so. So my thing is I've never really been one to ask for permission from like group organizers, which is something I guess you could do. You could try to find the organizer before you go live and talk to them like, hey, do you mind? This is your organize. I mean, and I say organizer, I mean, if it's an organized event, you don't want people to feel like you're crashing their party, right? Especially if they feel like you're, maybe they don't understand you entirely, but they like I said, that knee-jerk reaction to your presence might change the dynamic of what they're there to accomplish, which is they were holding space as a memorial for Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. And now, when I got there, I didn't walk right into the mix of everybody and start filming people that don't want to be on film. A lot of it is tact, I think, knowing how to work with a group of people that are already kind of leery. I make sure to narrate my way in and let people know, like, hey, what I'm doing. I talk through my stream because there's people there that are monitoring the streams at all times. Like I said, I was joking. I'm like, watch, if I go live here, I did it in LA. I was like, I'll go live and then I'll wait for a minute. I'll just stand in a corner and I'll wait. And eventually you'll see people doing this one. Like, oh, there he is. I'm like, all right, cool. So they get notification. And the people that don't want you there are going to say something. Other people are like, oh, you're here. They came up. I had a guy came up that we had dinner with that night. Yeah, that found me. Oh, I can't believe you're in Huntington Beach, man. And he knew where I was at. Came up on his bike and was like, bro, I'm so glad you're here. I want you to meet my family. And that's where we got a chance to break bread that night. Um, but the way that I went about it down in California was different. I found people that were there. You got to read the room, that looked like they would be willing to talk. And so I found a young black man that he had a bicycle, I think. And I was like, oh, he must be local. I was like, all right, so do you mind if I ask you a few cool questions? Do you mind being on camera? And so we started talking and we were having a conversation that kind of snowballed, which was really cool because the other black gentleman that got involved was from the UK. He's from London. And we started talking about the difference in the police forces between armed police and unarmed police and how things are done differently in other places. And then another individual came in and she was part of the production team that I was actually looking to meet up with, the one that are doing all these incredible documentaries. And she's a biracial Jewish woman. And so she's half black and Jewish. And she was talking about the way she has to change her appearances in order to get into certain places without being harassed differently by the police. And we had a really incredible conversation. And I think that's what opened up people to the realization that I wasn't there to like dox anybody. I wasn't there to antagonize anything. I was simply there to get a better understanding of what they were there for. And I think that it's going to take some time for people to fully understand that that's that's genuinely what I'm out trying to accomplish, which is get a better understanding. But to answer that question, I think that I didn't see what he had done originally to upset the crowd. But I think that it could have just been, put his camera in front of the wrong person and then decided to stake his claim to that space, like they posted a flag and was like, nope, I'm allowed to be here. I'm going to be here. And then that's all it takes sometimes. And then they're like, all right, well, no, you're not. And so, but I've had it happen. I've had it happen where people are like, like I said, in DC, we don't want you here. I'm like, oh, okay. That's fine.
I got booted from DC from Black Lives Matter Plaza myself in a pretty spectacular way, in the sense that I was quizzed on Juneteenth, and it was just, there were weird ideological questions that were asked of me, and I kind of didn't get them right or didn't understand why I had to get them right just to walk through,
Right.
and so I think I kind of walled up on them just as much. And I think that's because if I try to keep my opinions out of my work, but the security culture, if I'm going to be critical, it's so overwrought, it's so fanatical,
Yeah.
and it actually does the opposite of what I think they want. Because if you
Yeah.
want people to be sympathetic to your cause, enforcing a fanatical security culture does the opposite. It just pushes people away, so that you're only going to be preaching to the converted, essentially, that
Right.
are already buying in
Yeah, it
100%.
nurtures the echo chamber, like in a big
Yeah.
way.
And to those subcultural rules, if you
Yeah.
are 100% in, that's all we want. Well, unfortunately, when you do that, you're not only going to be pushing away people who might be sympathetic to your cause or are curious about your cause, but those who are willing to cover your cause. So
Right.
pretty soon, if all the cameras are pushed away, how successful are protests that happen in a vacuum,
Right.
that people aren't finding out about at all? And that's going to be the bigger questions that folks who are heavily involved in these scenes are going to have to answer, I think, because I saw I discussed this with BG just the other day, that in Portland, a fellow named Justin, who is a reporter. He had his glasses broken, and even an Antifa aligned, a young woman who's an Antifa aligned reporter, whose work I followed in the Pacific Northwest, she is no longer going to do, in other words, that they're even going after their own
Hmm.
Antifa aligned
Yeah.
streamers.
Yeah.
Then that security culture and power getting to such a extreme point, in such a heightened level, that you're kicking out anybody who's either going to want dialogue or be sympathetic or even just give you coverage.
Right.
And
And
so it's
I
going to,
think that they get. I think it's overhyping what the critical nature of what they do. So they don't want cameras to capture an act, a direct action, right? As it's referred to. But do they assume that that direct action is something that in itself is going to make great highlights or great headlines to draw attention? And that's the thing, is like, you're in block. No one knows who you are. We can't see who you are. If you're going to go out and commit an act of destruction to raise awareness for whatever cause it is you feel like you're fighting for, as counterproductive as I feel that is, because I feel like once you have the destruction, I think that's what people see. They don't see the cause. They don't see the surrounding, like, fundamental beliefs that go into that brought people out there. They just see someone smashing up the windows on a Starbucks or a TGI Fridays or Buffalo Wild Wings, and they're like, oh great, like, you just made our city look a little bit crappier. But and that's where, when that group, they have issues with people like us when we speak up about those things. Right? I'm like, listen, like, I'm not trying to stop you from doing what you're doing at all, but if you're going to do it, like, appreciate that I'm not the only camera in the world. There's closed circuit TV everywhere. Like, there's halos out in DC that, like, are crazy facial recognition cameras that are everywhere. Like, I'm not I'm not an enemy right now. Like, just appreciate. I'm just someone here that watching what's going on. Now, if you don't want people to see it happen, that's one thing. Maybe you should, and what I read last night, I was hoping to find it. Which is talking about security measures that are taken within these kind of autonomous movements. And that's how they want to be very decentralized security, decentralized movements that are, your ones and twos. Only speak to people that you know. Don't talk openly in groups, even if you feel like it's a trusted group of comrades, as they worded it. Like, they're like, don't do this, don't do that. And I think I took a screenshot of it. And if I have it right handy, I'll pull it up for you real quick. But it really kind of caught me off guard, because I realized that the way that they've got it set up is one where they were encouraging people to do things, direct actions, in their own cities, and it's one of those things in the Twitter sphere. It goes off into the void. But as they were telling people in their own cities to do these things on their own, but not to allow it to be like a publicly discussed event. And they said don't even joke about something that you feel might be a direct action worthy event, because somebody else will hear that, and like, there's always they say people are always listening. And I was just like, wow, it's getting deep, like they're really, which makes it kind of scary, honestly, because, like, what are you planning that is so secretive? Like, that's why people don't trust it, and that's why there's so much, like, pushback, because they're like, listen, like, even if your cause you feel is legitimate, like, if you're going to do something that's wildly destructive, other people could get hurt, and that's where it's like, they call them, collateral damage, right? Well, collateral damage could be human life. It doesn't just have to be the building next door on either side. And you saw it. I saw it happen in Kenosha. People were out, they were out protesting, and the protesting turned to a riot, and the riot turned into massive destruction in a city that didn't deserve it. Like the city did nothing. These businesses that were being targeted, like the buildings that were burning, like the lives that were lost. It's scary, man. And so that security culture that they've got going right now, I think it adds more fear, and maybe that's what they're trying to accomplish. I don't know. Maybe that's part of it.
And it doesn't necessarily happen without provoking an equal opposite reaction. Which is
Right.
If people are against it, what you saw in Kenosha, and the night that people were shot, that that Kyle Rittenhouse was involved. Were you there before that night, or did you arrive on that night? So
No, I was there like the entire a couple hours after Jacob Blake was shot, and so
that's right. You said
for like 2 weeks basically. Yeah.
So you saw that whole progression in Kenosha,
Mm-hmm.
and in other words, it started with, I think you described, family, community.
Mm-hmm.
Then at some point, did you see activist and Black Bloc groups come in, and then at some point militia that were like the counter response to that? Is that an accurate sort of trajectory about how stuff like that builds, or how would you, in your own words, describe what it was like being in Kenosha for several days?
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be an entire episode in its own segment.
Yeah.
But I'll say this about riots and like protests that take on destruction becomes part of the process. They're incredibly adaptive, like amazingly adaptive, in like this super like hyper speed of adaptation, where they see something that kind of works, and then immediately that becomes part of the fundamental, and it's just as building blocks, and it escalates. And you saw that with things like a car fire. One car was lit on fire, and it made a lot of popping, a lot of big flames, and it was like, oh well, this one we can burn. There's 100 other cars, let's burn all of them too. And then it was like, oh, we can get away with burning this building. Let's burn that one too, and that one as well. And it started off with these dump trucks that they had. They had these city trucks that were there, and they used those for blockading the road. And one got lit on fire, and then another, and another. And by the end of night one, there was like 3 or 4 dump trucks that were burning. And then that just made its way towards the city, And then there was some structure fires, and you didn't see that happening at the hands of, no, I'll say specifically that I watched people light these things on fire, and they weren't people in block. I watched them like dumping gasoline into the cab of a city truck and lighting it on fire, and it wasn't people in block, which is, like I said, it changes as you get further away from some of these like major cities, you know what I mean? And but that presence slowly became part of it, over the course of a couple of days. But the militia groups or the armed citizens as well. It wasn't just militia-esque individuals. It was like armed citizens that were. And what was interesting about the dynamic there is like the first guys that I started talking to had Justice for Jacob on their bulletproof vests, and they had BLM patches on the back of their helmets. But they looked just like a militia group that would have been, like a Patriot group or a 3% group or whatever. And so they were getting kind of accosted by the crowd, and they were like, "Dude, we're here to protect you guys. We're here to protect the citizens of the streets here. We're here to protect these buildings from people that are coming in and destroying your city." Like
that was like the libertarian militia, the one that was on, because they said that if you're against the government, then we stand with you. And then they said, all lives won't matter till Black Lives Matter. Let's go. And there was a clip of these guys. Some of them had yellow shirt on.
There was a lot of diversity amongst the armed individuals that were out there. So like, I couldn't say they were all dialed into the same, but that definitely was one of the
at the gas station?
It was by the gas station. And there was guys that were just wearing like, one guy looked like a World War II paratrooper. Like he had the most interesting fatigues on, and I swear he had like I remember my dad having an old helmet from back when he was in like the army when I was a little kid. Like it looked like something out of, out of a costume shop, but and these guys were like yelling at each other, and there's guys on the rooftops, and they were kind of like directing. They were never like pointing their guns at people like that. When I was around, they weren't like, get away from this building or get away from this. They were just kind of putting themselves in front of these different shops and different different stores and car dealerships, but didn't stop from happening. They just became another one of the targets. The guys on the rooftop were having rocks and bottles thrown at them, and the group just got pushed out of the park. I think it's Civic Park, by armed individuals with tanks and tear gas and whatnot. So they got pushed right into this waiting group of militia, or other armed individuals. And so for them, like I said, your knee jerk, your optics are like, oh wait, you're all together, you're all part of it. And so that's kind of how that went down, and then of course it got terrible when lives were lost when Rittenhouse actually, pulled trigger. And so I was amazed that was the only gunshots that were fired, through the course of that. There was other reports of things happening, but like as far as like reported fatalities, like I would have assumed that the gasoline and fire combination that was that crowd and the chaos that was there, that was something that I've never experienced. And I think people, we've been in Portland and we've seen that happen there. We've seen what happens in Seattle when you've got some tear gas and you've got the police presence. But when there's a complete lack of police and it's like anything goes, like the chaos does take over. And there's something in some people that don't have the dividing line that says, all right, that's not acceptable. I don't do that. Like I shouldn't do that. And then they say it's an opportunity comes up, I'm going to do it. If they don't have that stopper, you know what I mean? In their lexicon of things that they hold to their belief system, like I can get away with it, I'm going to do it. And there's people that just act that way. And then that's where a lot of the people that were there that were doing just that, Then there were most were from out of town. They said that it was like 85% of the arrests were from people that were from out of city, out of state. Out of like the 100, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it was like well over 150 people that were arrested. There was, the majority of them were not even from the area. So it wasn't like there was opportunity that came up to do something chaotic and destructive.
By that last day, so much in the previous days. I'd been watching streams, and there were so many odd occurrences. Guys with guns that were yelling at Bearcats that were there was that one video of a guy
just standing there in front of the Bearcat with his AR-15 or whatever he had.
There were just so many surreal the night before there was a group of militia that were all on the ground, and then they get up, and then it was just one cop who had them all on the ground, and then he ushers them, and then they all get away. And it was just, there were just so many surreal, bizarre happenings that I was seeing leading up to that. So that night I stayed up all night and I watched all these multiple feeds at the same time. And it was so, and you could just see this thing unfold in how chaotic it was. And I saw the official Black Lives Matter protest ending around 9:00 or whatever it was in the evening, and them saying officially go home. Then around that City Hall Plaza, that park, all of a sudden another group comes in, and they're doing it. They're in block, and some people are doing rallying cries, and then they just are throwing stuff against the fence and shaking the fence, and certain fireworks are being used and so forth. And then they clear everybody out of that park area, which had to have been one of the most you think that this is an error that you would have known by when was Kenosha? It was already in August or so.
August,
And you'd think by then that they would know, because this is what I saw in Santa Monica, California on May the 31st, which is they gassed people, and then everybody was sent towards the store, the businesses. And then so they just burned businesses and broke.
Their frustration went to the community.
Went to the community.
And that's exactly how.
It's exactly how you saw Kenosha.
Is that Portland's the same situation in front of the federal building? That's like a government block right there. Like that park there's courthouses and federal buildings that are like surround that entire park. And so when they're like tear gassing people and chasing them out into the streets, it's like now it's the citizens and the community out there that have to deal with it. That's exactly what you're saying is Kenosha. Like that blew my mind. I was like, stop, man, like make this your standoff point.
Yeah.
But you guys can weather the storm. You have tanks and artillery. Like you'll be just fine. But if they want to go ahead and have that violent exchange, let it happen here where you have, like I said, big fences and armored proof or, bulletproof vehicles that can actually take that. Not like,
Right.
like a mattress store down the street that's getting burned down, or a tattoo shop, or a wireless store, or, someone's home, or, auto dealerships that are now being lit on fire. I mean, they did find their way to the DOC building and burned that one down. But like in between there and the where they were pushed out, there was just violence and destruction the entire way. So
And
yeah,
those giant fences, they could be like they're like a chew toy. I've said, if you had them and they're, if people are focusing their energy on them, then they're not going to be, focusing it anywhere else, and yeah, it's the same thing in Portland. Somebody asked if we had seen Ted Wheeler's press conference. He said, did CJ or you see Mayor Ted Wheeler's press conference actually calling the protesters anarchist and asking the public to help identify them as they arrive to marches? I did not see that.
No. So yeah, to Oceana 23 on YouTube. I didn't see that press release, honestly. A lot of Ted Wheeler I just block out just because it's one of those local politicians that I was just like, oh man, especially, just these photo ops that he did. Like when he came out to the crowd, he stood in that crowd. Right. Do you remember this? And got tear gassed and, for a minute, and then he got evacuated out right away. But I was like, come on, man. Like, don't fake it. Like, don't act like you're out here and you're with the shit, or whatever. Like, you're just like, I'm here in solidarity. We don't want these guys here either, these federal agents, but then he goes back to his building. He's like, kick their ass, whatever it is. So I kind of blocked him out.
Well, you're from the Pacific Northwest, also
right.
From further up north, but there is a different energy there. I've noticed, even compared to California, there's a different energy and sort of when it comes to being plugged into the ideology of what can happen. And any final thoughts as you move forward? How do you see things having changed? Do you feel any sense in our collective consciousness of with the Chauvin trial, being over? I mean, obviously there's going to be all these other officers that are going to be tried as well, but is the energy from where you're from and across the country, how would you characterize that? And what do you imagine you'll see, or even just hope that you'll see in the next couple of months?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the energy you're talking about, I think it's like the perfect storm. I think in the Northwest, there's, and to be clear, I'm not going to be most of these people you see out there protesting are young individuals. They're young people. A lot of them are students, and a lot of them are very well educated. Like, they're educated. I say very well, but they're educated. They're not ignorant individuals. They understand what they understand. They believe what they believe. And you got to understand, like, a lot of that liberal aspect of, I don't say liberal, man, that's just not the way to do it. But a lot of these hard left individuals, they're younger but educated. So you're going to find them a lot of the schools, a lot of the colleges. We have a lot of community colleges in the Northwest here that are really well known. People come in to even just come to our community colleges, but we have some incredible universities in the area as well. In these places, like in downtown Seattle, you have Seattle University, Seattle Central Community College. You've got Bellevue College. You've got University of Washington. You've got all these, University of Puget Sound. You've got all these colleges that are all in the area, and so it's like a hotbed for these, different beliefs and different understanding, different educational aspects of political system. And it's kind of been a little bit more accepted in the Northwest. The protest community, how it's been done, and I think it's changed a lot. In the tactics that were used, and we saw it happen in the Chop Chaz. As Andrew was saying, it's happening in George Floyd Square now. These places that are being kind of like the security overhaul of who's in control is undermining the opportunity to allow there to be an educational platform. And so, what I'm hoping will happen moving forward is that the protest community will become more aware of the fact that, like, the more platforms they have, the better opportunity they have to spread their message, right? And I'm hoping that as more common individuals, like everyday people, are involved in a movement publicly, that those will be the people that we get a chance to talk to and be a part of the understanding. And I see that a lot in other places like Minneapolis, even in California. I met some people down there, Kenosha, all over the place, where people are at Louisville, where people are just open to talking and they want their message to be heard. And I'm hoping that the protest community sees that, they appreciate that not everybody's your enemy. You kind of become what you create in a lot of situations like that. Like if you make me your enemy, like, all right, that's what I'll be. And for you, it'll always be that way. But in the wake of the Chauvin trial, I saw what could, like, the pressure cooker was, like the pressure was released, at least in Minneapolis that day, where it could have gone. I mean, there were buildings boarded up for miles, outside of the city, and not just like front storefronts. 2-3 stories up, buildings were boarded up, like something I hadn't seen before. And I'm hoping that eventually, as people are seeing that they can take a little bit of stock and faith in some of the systems that we have at play here in the United States, that figuratively and realistically, some of these boards can start coming down, and we can put more faith in change and evolution and growth and understanding and inclusive involvement with our beliefs. But it's going to take work. It's going to take work, and it's going to take a lot of individual work for people to open themselves up to being willing to see things differently and to see people differently and to start seeing people instead of seeing a title, instead of seeing a logo that's put out in front of you, generally, unless that's what you're putting out in front of you. I mean, if you're wearing, like the guy in Huntington Beach, if you're wearing a Proud Boy shirt, guess what? You're going to get dealt with like a Proud Boy, and that the people are going to see you as a Proud Boy. But I hope that people can appreciate that we need to stop dehumanizing our society, and quite the opposite. We need to put a little bit more tenderness back into the way we deal with each other, and appreciate that the collective group of voices is going to get us to the growth and the movement that we need as a nation to continually move towards. So these kinds of conversations, people need to have more of them.
I would agree wholeheartedly. So thank you for being here with us today. CJ, where can people find you? Your CJ TV Media, is that the
CJ TV Media LLC. You can find me on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. IG as well. You can go to CJ TV Media. If you search it anywhere, you'll see my fat head, so it's pretty easy to find me. We're trying to be a little bit more involved in some of our platforms that we don't spend a lot of time on. But come on over, set yourself up notifications, become a supporter, help support my boy Jeremy as well, set up as a supporter over there as well, and help the push and need for the independent journalism, so we can keep getting more eyes and ears on the streets, so people can see and experience the history that's being made in the world around us.
Here. The CJ.
There was a plug for you. You didn't ask for it. That was your plug right there.
Oh, thank you. No, I appreciate it. And folks, yes, if you're not watching right now on YouTube, please subscribe. YouTube.com/unblockedlive. This has been another episode of Unblocked Live, the anti-polarization podcast. My guest has been CJ of CJ TV. Thanks for being with us. And until next time, we'll do it again.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Take it easy. And we're